Chapter 13. Dickerson knew Elliot was a goner. There was no way they could keep him alive long enough to reach an auto dock. No way. He was going to die here in this shuttle inside this fucking ghost ship. The best they could hope for was to return his body to S&R Black for a proper ceremony. At worst, he'd be just another corpse left afloat inside the derelict. He'd been staring at Elliot's maglock suit as if he could somehow make eye contact with the comatose Marine through the impenetrable visor. But he didn't need to see the man's face to know he was dying. The suit's lifetime readouts made that fact all too certain. The hatch to the cockpit slid aside. He broke eye contact with Elliot's suit and looked up at Mira. The corporal shut the hatch behind her and stood in silence.
"We have to leave, now,"
she said over the comms.
"Wait, what?"
Carbonaro turned her helmet to face the corporal.
"Why the fuck would we do that?"
Mira seemed to sag slightly.
"Because this area is unsafe,"
she said. Dickerson rose to his feet. You talked to Black? The corporal nodded.
"I did. Black suggests we get the hell out of here. I tend to agree with her." "So you talked to Gunny?"
Carbonaro asked, hope in her voice.
"No,"
Mira said. She moved forward to Elliot and paused before she spoke.
"Let's get him ready to move." "What do you mean you didn't talk to Gunny?"
Carbonaro said, her voice higher pitched than normal. Mira stopped in mid-step and put her feet down. She stood to her full height, her helmet pointed directly at Carbonaro.
"Carb, focus. We're still unable to talk directly to the command crew, but we have to leave right now."
Silence followed her words. The last sentence was punctuated with anger and frustration. Carbonaro paused for a moment before raising herself from the deck.
"Yes, Corporal,"
she said. Dickerson moved forward to help Mira with Elliot. I'll carry him, he said. Mira moved to help and then stopped. He looked up at her. What?
"Is there a point?"
Mira asked. No one spoke. Dickerson sighed inside his helmet, unaware his mic was still hot. Mira swung her helmet to peer at him, and he felt as though the two of them had locked eyes. No, there's no point.
"Fuck that,"
Carbonaro said.
"I'll carry him. Let's get him to—" "Stow it, Carb,"
Mira said.
"We're taking him. We have a chance, but it's a thin one. I have updated schematics of Mira. If they're accurate, we'll find an autodock and an emergency power generator. But I want to be very clear. I have 2 Marines left in my squad that are alive and relatively healthy. My priority is making sure you 2 get out of here alive. If Elliot becomes a liability to that priority, then we'll leave him behind. No arguments. Understood?"
Carbonaro muttered something through the comms, but Dickerson wasn't sure what it was. Mira either didn't hear it or didn't care. Ah, Corporal, Dickerson said.
"Aye, boss,"
Carb said.
"Good.
She leaned down to grab Elliot beneath his arms.
Gear up. I want everything we salvaged from the skiff on our backs. After that, we'll get him up."
Dickerson passed out the flechette rifles, extra magazines, the remains of the medkit, the beam cutters and batteries, as well as liquid rations. The 3 Marines quickly filled their suit packs, and even Elliot's. If he died, Dickerson was going to take his pack. Since he'd no idea if they'd ever find another way to resupply, they couldn't take any chances. He didn't know why, but he made sure Mira didn't see him take the strangely marked cylinder out of the sample case before ramming it into his suit pack. The moment it disappeared inside, he felt guilty. He almost removed it. Almost. Once they cut his suit magnetics, Elliot weighed nothing. The 3 of them easily raised him from the deck. Dickerson maglocked one of Elliot's gloves to his suit pack and put the rest of him over his shoulder. Mira walked to the cargo bay hatch and put her hand over the open button.
"Okay, let's say goodbye to our little home,"
she said.
"Thanks for nothing,"
Carb muttered. Mira punched the button. The warning lights flashed yellow, bathing the Marines in surreal light. The pumps came on and swallowed as much atmosphere as they could back into the reserve tanks. Then the lights turned red. The hatch slowly slid upward, revealing a rectangle of absolute darkness.
"Carb,"
Mira said.
"Watch our backs. Dickerson, follow me."
Ah, the 2 Marines said in unison. The corporal's suit lights came to life, bright circles penetrating the yawning mouth of blackness ahead. Once again, the darkness swallowed the light a little more than 5 meters out.
Carb, get your rifle and keep it handy. Aye, boss.
Before Carbonaro had even replied, Calimura had a rifle in her hands. Dickerson rolled his eyes and pulled his pistol from his belt. With Elliot maglocked to his suit, he had one free hand. If the corporal was calling for weapons, he sure as shit wasn't going to be unarmed when they stepped into the cavernous shuttle bay. Calimura stepped out of the shuttle, and Dickerson followed. The first few steps were awkward as he swung his helmet lights side to side to cover their flank. The corporal's helmet light shined on one of the corpses from the shuttle. It had hit the far wall, chips of crimson ice floating beside it. One of its arms had broken off like a piece of frozen chicken. Could have done without seeing that, he thought to himself. They hugged the wall, bypassing the O2 station they'd used, and continued to the back of the shuttle bay. Calimura's helmet light panned starboard and illuminated a large pressure door. The moment the light hit the door, the luminescent emergency strips came to life. The words "Cargo Bay" glowed in bright green.
Shit!
Carb said.
How did we not see this earlier? Because we weren't looking for it,
Calimura said.
The strips require a direct hit from a light to charge them. We could have wandered around this bay for hours before finding this door.
Calimura reached for a small recessed panel next to the pressure door. She tapped it with her fingers, and it swung open. A moment later, she wound the emergency power generator until a light on the panel glowed green.
Listen up,
she said over the comms.
We don't know what's on the other side of this door, so be ready for anything. Carb, I want an angle inside the room. On my right. I'll take the left. Copy, boss.
Carbonaro mag-walked to the right side of the door, dropped to her knees, and aimed her rifle. Once it opened, she'd have a view of the room from the middle to the left. Even though her lights would only provide enough illumination to see the first few meters, it was better than nothing. Dickerson bent his knees, trying to make himself as small a target as possible. His responsibility was to fire on anything directly in front of them. His pistol, hardly as effective as a rifle, would at least provide covering fire if something came at them. Nothing is coming at us, he thought to himself. This ship is a goddamn tomb.
On 3,
Calimura said. She counted off and then tripped the panel. Dickerson held his breath as the pressure door slid aside, heart racing. The 3 Marines' light pierced the darkness, but only to a point. At the illumination's edge, he made out shadowy rectangles and cylinders. Probably crates and drums, but it was difficult to tell. He was just happy something horrible hadn't jumped through the wide rectangle of darkness to rip off his face.
Clear,
Calimura said.
Clear,
Carb echoed. Dickerson exhaled heavily into his mic. Clear from what I can tell.
Okay,
Calimura said.
Same positions as before. Carb, get the rear. Aye, boss,
she said, her voice tight and clipped. He'd heard that voice before. Carb was in the zone. Despite the effects of the concussion and the exhaustion they'd all felt in the shuttle, their adrenal glands were pumping now, and every movement seemed sharper, every thought a little clearer. He knew it wouldn't last long. The trip into Mira, the hunt for O2, and the sense of dread that seemed to pervade everything had already taxed their bodies. Now all they could hope for was another respite, and soon. The suit's nutrient packs would start letting loose electrolytes, protein, and carbohydrates to keep them going, but what they needed most was sleep. Unless they found a hidey hole they could easily defend, the squad would have to watch every corner, every entryway, every possible flank until they somehow managed to get off this ship. A wave of exhaustion hit him, but departed just as quickly. Thank you, nannies, he said to himself. Calimura stepped forward into the loading/cargo bay from the shuttle bay. Dickerson hung back, waiting for her to get 2 meters ahead of him, and then followed, Elliot still draped over his shoulder. He didn't bother checking his rear cam. He knew Carbonaro would wait until he moved far enough inside the cargo bay before beginning her forward progress.
Boss, I'm putting down a claymore,
Carbonaro said.
Do it,
Calimura responded.
As soon as we make sure we don't need to GTFO and back to the shuttle bay, disable it. Aye, boss.
Dickerson brought up his rear cam. Carb pulled the device, a mere 10 centimeters in diameter, from her belt and placed it on the deck. Although he couldn't see them, he knew the Claymore's laser motion detector sensors were active. If anything so much as moved in a 180-degree arc near the door, the device would target the object and detonate. The mine contained enough flechettes to take out a tightly packed squad, let alone a single combatant threatening their rear. He just hoped a floating body wouldn't set it off. He killed the rear cam view and continued looking ahead. His HUD lit up with feeds from the suit's side cameras, letting him keep tabs on their right and left flanks. With a thought, his block grabbed Callimore's helmet cam feed and placed it in the upper right of his vision. Now he could finally see ahead of him. Kelly was glad she muted her mic. Dickerson and Carbonaro couldn't hear her deep intakes of breath, the near-panicked exhalations, or the shivers of fear racking her body. Every step forward took a force of will she didn't know she had, and the only thing keeping her moving was the hope they could somehow save Elliot's life. According to the schematics Black had sent her, the cargo/loading bay stretched for more than 200 meters. Its width, another 200 meters. As if that wasn't bad enough, it was also 75 meters tall. If Mira had artificial gravity, they'd only have to worry about the combined 40,000 square meters of area. But since the entire ship was in ZG, attacks or hazards could be anywhere in the 3 million cubic meter hold. With the combined lights of the three Marines, she could still only see 5 to 10 meters in front of her. She'd never been so afraid in her life. The only good news was they were headed for an auto dock. According to the schematics, there were 2 trauma stations located on either end of the bay. Each trauma station also had an O2 refill station and an emergency generator to run both. If her squad was lucky, very lucky, they were still functional. But she wasn't hopeful. Focused on the narrowly illuminated cone ahead of her, she nearly screamed when something moved at the edge of her peripheral vision. She reactivated her mic. "Halt," she said, and held up a fist. Without sound, it was impossible to know if Dickerson had actually stopped behind her. When he didn't bash into her, she knew he'd at least heard her over the comms. She slowly turned her head, the cone of light following her, to gaze at the shadow. The white light caught 2 objects moving toward them. She waited, her flechette rifle pointed in their direction, finger tight on the trigger. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3. The objects finally floated directly into the light. Kelly's wide eyes instantly recognized them. Pine cones. And they were floating toward her. At first, she thought maybe her HUD had developed a serious fault because the pair seemed to vibrate and shake across their exterior. Then they opened. A shiny claw slid from the end of the closest pine cone. Her mouth opened in a crazed shriek that rattled inside her helmet. The middle to top portion of the first pine cone extended, revealing a circle of waving polyps.
"What the fuck is that?"
Dickerson yelled into the comms. Kelly Mira couldn't find her voice. Everything seemed to have shut down. She was frozen, watching as the thing closed to 2 meters, its waving tendrils seeming to welcome her.
"Fucking shoot, Marine!"
Dickerson yelled. She felt a snap in her mind. The sound of his drill instructor-like voice smashed through the fear and indecision. Her finger pulled the trigger. The rifle vibrated, but didn't buck, as a magnetic field pushed the round from the barrel. The oblong Atmos steel round traveled 3 centimeters before its rocket propellant came to life. With such a short distance, the flechette round didn't even have time to explode before slamming into the creature at nearly 50 meters per second. The pinecone thing disappeared from the light and back into the darkness. Its twin, fully extended, revealing its hideous body and appendages, undulated in the vacuum and propelled itself at Dickerson. Kelly turned with it, her mind on autopilot. She quickly snap-aimed and fired another round. The first flechette round went wide, but the creature flipped itself and tried to undulate away. Dickerson had fired his pistol, his round going wide as well. As Kelly tried to make a kill shot, a round smashed into the remaining attacker and whisked it away into the darkness.
"Got it, boss!"
Carb yelled.
"What the fuck is this shit?"
Dickerson cried. "Don't know, don't care," Kelly said. They had to move. Now. "Disengage mags. We're flying. Carb, watch our 6 like a motherfucking sensor. Dickerson, stay close." She bent her knees, killed the mag boots, and pushed upward. She rose into the air a few centimeters before activating her suit jets. Walking would be too slow. There could be thousands of those things in here. They had to get out. Now. Kelly's heart thumped loud enough in her chest to make her ears pound. She switched to a tactical HUD and activated the motion sensors. Her helmet cast a net of micro laser bursts. Anything that moved into the net would immediately appear as a target on her HUD. She hoped Carb had done the same. The cam feed from the back of the helmet showed Dickerson less than a meter behind her, Elliot still hanging over his shoulder. Her brief glance also showed Carbonaro jetting behind them. Kelly increased her speed. They had 40 meters of distance before they reached the pressure door leading into the foredecks. She accelerated to 1 meter per second. Any faster, and she risked running into something before having a chance to slow. Even worse, she might find herself in a group of those things before she had a chance to stop. Her HUD lit with a target off to her left 6 meters away. Kelly ignored it. For now. If it came closer, she'd blast it. "Dickerson, do you—"
I see it, Corporal,
he said, cutting off her words. "Carb?"
Got at least 3 targets behind me, and the Claymore went off.
"Fuck," Kelly muttered. The seconds passed like years, the remaining meters clicking down with absurd slowness. She glanced upward, and the targeting net showed another 5 objects within its range. "Above and in front."
I see them,
Dickerson said.
Got more above me, too.
Kelly's HUD flashed yellow as someone fired their weapon. It was Carb.
We need to get out of here!
Carb yelled. "Did you get it?"
Hi, boss, but there's too many to count behind it. What the hell are they attracted to?
Dickerson asked. "Worry about that later," Kelly yelled. "Just follow real fucking close." 20. 19. She couldn't see the 75-meter tall wall, but she knew it was there, tantalizingly close. A large pressure door separated the cargo bay from the foredecks. As the distance ratcheted off, she wondered how the hell she'd have time to charge it up and open it. 15 meters to go. "Carb, cover Dickerson. I'm going for the door."
Hi, boss. Corporal, are you nuts?
Good question, she thought to herself, and hid her jets. She doubled her speed through the darkness, watching the distance calculator count off. Her laser intrusion net flashed with multiple targets, above her and on her flanks. Between her and the door, her HUD marked over a dozen targets moving through the black. Kelly's teeth clicked together as she realized she was heading straight into a cluster of the creatures. Shrieking inside her helmet, she hit her attitude thrusters in sequence, flattened herself into a horizontal missile, and began to roll her body. The mini swarm of pine cones bounced off her helmet, her flanks, and her back. With each impact, she imagined the claw appendage ripping out her suit, trying to find a way in. Would one of them cling to her, slowly chewing away until it pierced the armor and welcomed vacuum into her suit? The second it took to get through the swarm seemed like minutes, and then she was through and heading to the bulkhead at a suicidal rate of speed. "Swarm coming!" she yelled breathlessly into the comms. Dickerson might have responded. Carbonaro might have too, but she was too focused on slowing her speed before she pancaked into the thick pressure door. Another sequence of suit thruster burns as she changed back into a vertical position, flying at 2 meters per second and 10 centimeters above the deck. Kelly raised her legs, stretched until her feet pointed in front of her, and put a free hand out to help cushion the blow. A last burst of compressed nitrogen as she cut her speed to 1 meters per second before slamming into the pressure door. As soon as her feet hit, she bent her knees to take the majority of the force, activated her free hand's magnetics, and crumpled into the door. Her bones shook with the impact, but the suit's internal dampeners took the worst of the punishment. Well, that and her knees. Her free hand hit the door, and she stuck fast before her body could bounce away from it. A single bright lance of pain shot through her skull, and she winced. That can't be good for a concussion, she thought through a confused haze. And then the sound of confusion lit up her comms.
Where the hell am I?
A weak, groggy voice asked.
Why can't I see? Elliot!
Carbonaro yelled.
Shut up and hang on!
It was Carb's voice that broke through Kelly's dazed thoughts. She spider-crawled using her hands and feet across the door to the side. Suit lights on full, she found the recessed panel and punched it with her free hand. It opened, exposing the same kind of charger she'd used on the shuttle bay door. Elliot continued talking, but she wasn't listening as she wound the mechanism until the light turned green. She punched the button, and the door began to slide open. Get here, now, full speed! Carbonaro and Dickerson were screaming over one another's voices, Elliot's confused words occasionally breaking through the comm chatter. She flung herself sideways and floated into the doorway. Her suit lights revealed destruction and debris, but the corridor appeared safe. She turned, held her rifle with both hands, and focused. Carb and Dickerson were traveling at nearly 2 meters per second now. Kelly's HUD showed dozens of the pine cones trailing Dickerson. A mini swarm above Carbonaro had picked up speed and were nearly on Dickerson and Elliot. Kelly aimed her rifle, put her finger on the trigger, and waited. If she fired, she might hit Dickerson, Elliot, or Carbonaro. She switched her rifle to stun rounds and fired at the swarm above Dickerson. The round departed the rifle and the rocket engine kicked in. It streaked across the darkness, leaving a trail of yellow light before it hit the swarm. The round detonated in a cloud of blue lightning. The electricity storm began to fade just before the world exploded. A brilliant flash of red light overloaded her HUD, blinding her for an instant before compensating. The afterimage pulsed across her retinas, leaving her vision scarred and surreal.
What the fuck was that?
Dickerson yelled. Carbonaro's voice followed closely behind.
They're coming for you, Dickerson. Watch your left.
Kelly pointed her suit lights to follow Carb's warning, and her mouth dropped open. The 3 Marines, Elliot still attached to Dickerson's back, were surrounded. The pinecone things held themselves in swarms of 5 to a dozen, and they were converging from all sides. Except below. Hit the floor! Kelly yelled. Carb and Dickerson's suit lights immediately aimed to the deck as they changed attitude to strafe the floor. She stepped sideways, took a position at the corner of the door, and fired around at each major swarm. Jagged arms of electric blue flashed out before creating 3 separate crimson explosions. Dickerson didn't bother slowing. He traveled past Kelly and through the doorway, Carbonaro close behind. Just before Carb entered the safe zone, Kelly punched the emergency close button. Carb's feet entered the room just as the door closed. Her comms buzzed with pained grunts and Elliot's barely discernible words. She turned and pointed her lights at their suit outlines in her HUD. Dickerson had crashed into a stack of crates. Carbonaro had slowed herself with a glove and kept herself from ramming the wall at high speed. Status! Kelly yelled.
One piece, boss,
Carb said. Dickerson groaned.
I'm alive, but I think I bruised a rib. Elliot? What?
He breathed.
The fuck is going on?
A shaky grin crossed Kelly's face. Glad to hear your voice, Elliot.
I'm not feeling so good, Corporal.
Elliot wheezed. His voice sounded like he'd swallowed gravel. We'll take care of that, I promise, Kelly said. Dickerson, Carb, we need to make sure this area is clear of those things.
Hi, boss,
Carb said. She immediately broke off and began shining her suit lights on the starboard side of the wide corridor. Dickerson said nothing, but began doing the same on the port side. I'm going to maglock you to the wall, she said to Elliot.
Didn't feel like standing anyway,
he said in return. The Marine had to know he was dying. His HUD, if it still worked, was no doubt lit up with warnings. She connected her block to the suit using her squad override. The readings from his suit immediately popped up on her HUD. His blood pressure had risen from when they were in the shuttle, but his body was close to going back into shock. In addition, his suit was venting CO2. Whatever damage he'd sustained in the collision with the skiff had not only removed his hand, but obviously broke the recycler. The suit, in turn, vented small amounts of CO2 if they weren't used for propulsion. His O2 capacity had also been affected. He needed a new suit as well as an autodock. She gently pushed him to the wall beside the pressure door and maglocked his remaining hand and his left boot. It was awkward looking, but not uncomfortable. If they had to move fast, she could rip him from the wall and place him on her shoulder without much effort. She just hoped that wasn't going to be necessary.
My hand is gone,
he said in a flat monotone. Kelly hesitated. She didn't want him to panic and send himself back into shock, but she couldn't exactly lie to him. Yes, you've lost a hand, Elliot. He giggled and then started to cough.
Guess I'll be charging the SFMC for a new one,
he said. Yeah, Kelly said. She turned from him and scanned the 5-meter arc around the area. Apart from the occasional piece of metal debris, the pine cones were completely absent. Dickerson, status?
All clear, Corporal.
He drawled. He was trying to keep the pain from his voice, but it wasn't working.
Clear here too, boss.
Carbonaro, more than 10 meters away now, finally turned, her suit lights providing more illumination of the wall.
There are some markings on the wall. Looks like we are on the penultimate level of the foredecks. Penultimate?
Dickerson asked.
Didn't know you knew any words with that many syllables.
Carb giggled.
Fuck you, Dickerson. That said,
Dickerson said.
What's next?
Kelly disconnected from Elliot's suit and brought up the schematics. The cargo bay had 2 auto docks, but she wasn't going back in there without serious weaponry and support. At this point, they were effectively cut off from the mid and aft decks. That could be a major problem. The nearest auto dock was a mere 10 meters away from their position, but it would be impossible to get there without going through swarms of the pine cones. And as far as she knew, that was certain death. She found what she was looking for and smiled to herself. Kelly moved her head and shined the light upward at the ceiling 4 meters above her. The metal looked intact. At least they wouldn't have to worry about falling through on this level. Thank you, Black, she thought. Squad, I'm sending you new schematics I received from Black.
Black?
Elliot said.
You mean Gunny and Talby are coming for us?
Both Dickerson and Carb turned from their stations to look at her. Bathed in the bright suit lights, Callie suddenly felt as though she were on a stage. No, they're not, she said. Not yet.
What did Black say?
Dickerson asked. It's complicated, Kelly said. We can't talk directly to the command crew, although they are aware of our location. An incoming KBO might hit Mira, and so Gunny and Talby are attaching tow lines to get this bitch moving out of harm's way. For right now, we're on our own. No one said a word. Not for the first time, she was glad the Marines couldn't see her face. They didn't need to know just how frustrated and terrified she was. Hell, no one did. Here's the plan, Kelly said. The medical bay is above us. There isn't a lifter for another 30 meters to the bow and on the starboard side. That means we have 4 corridors to travel before we reach an ingress, and another 40 to reach the actual med bay.
Shit,
Dickerson said.
There are more of those pinecone things. We're fucked.
Don't borrow trouble, Kelly said, although she'd been thinking the same thing. She reconnected to Elliot's suit. The nannies had doped him again to kill the pain, but he was still very close to shock. They'd have to be very careful. Carb, Dickerson, I want you two to scout the path. Go 10 meters, no further. Understood?
Hi, boss.
Carb said.
Copy, Corporal.
Dickerson said. Fire first, ask questions later, and use your stun rounds. Those seem to work.
Yes, they did,
Carb said through a giggle.
Lit those fuckers up. Wonder why.
We'll ask Black when we talk to her again, Kelly said. For now, let's just get Elliot to an auto dock. Get moving. Carbonaro gave her a salute and turned to Dickerson.
Come on, big boy. Work to do.
Dickerson groaned.
I'm going to need a serious liberty after this shit show.
Kelly watched their suit lights slowly disappear down the hall. She hoped against hope they'd find a safe passage.